My name's Sam Bauer. I'm an extension educator with the University of Minnesota Extension. We're here this afternoon on the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus, and we're going to talk to you about spring damaged lawns, particularly some tips that you can use to help recovery of some damaged lawns from the winter. So this area that we're standing on here was an area that was converted to tall fescue in the spring of 2013 with the main goal of reducing water use here on the St. Paul campus. So tall fescue is a very, very drought tolerant grass. It's a really low maintenance grass and fairly hardy for Minnesota as well. Unfortunately, and we get some harsh winters here in Minnesota, you know, tall fescue's winter tolerance can be somewhat variable compared to some of our more mainstay grasses in Minnesota like Kentucky bluegrass or some of the fine fescues. Even though we still recommend tall fescue quite often, but often, as you see here, some fairly simple repair tips might be necessary to get recovery of your tall fescue lawn in the spring of the year. When we look across the lawn here, we see damage in different areas. The first area that I want to point out is what we're looking at on the right-hand side of me here. This is damage from de-icing salts that are applied to the sidewalk as a safety concern when we get snow and ice over the winter months. What we see is we see dead tall fescue here, about 1.5 or 2 feet distance from the sidewalk, and with salt damage you'll generally notice that the damage will reduce as you get further from that sidewalk. We have a summer annual broadleaf weed here called knotweed. And this is usually the first thing that starts growing in the spring of the year. Most of us get pretty excited when we see little knotweed coming up because it looks like little grass seedlings, but unfortunately the result is something much less pleasing, this broadleaf weed here, knotweed. Now, my suggestion for repair of this area generally would be to take a hard tooth rake like this one here. We're gonna loosen up the soil a little bit, remove some of that dead tissue, and then I would even pull out some of this knotweed as well and try to get some of that out of there. The issue with trying to control the knotweed at this point in time is herbicides can be particularly damaging for some of our young seedlings, so I really wouldn't use a broadleaf herbicide in this case. The one pre-emergent herbicide that we use to control knotweed is called isoxaben. And unfortunately, there's a 60-day waiting time for reseeding. So if we were to use that pre-emergent herbicide, we wouldn't be able to seed for at least 2 months. So my suggestion is just tolerate the knotweed at this point in time, and we'll try to get some good grass growing there. So I'm gonna rake it up really hard. I'm gonna expose the soil. The next step after a hard tooth rake to prepare that seed bed would be to apply the seeding mixture. Now, generally you're gonna wanna have a good idea of the seed that was originally planted there, so you can match up the existing species of grass or the varieties of grass with your existing lawn. In this case, I've chosen exactly the same 4 varieties of tall fescue. We have 5% Kentucky bluegrass in there as well, just to help a little bit with recovery also. So we'll use that same seeding mix to repair this area. The 2 options that I have really for seeding are, you know, for some of these small boulevard type of areas, you could seed that very practically by hand, okay? If you're seeding larger areas, I like to use a piece of equipment like this. You can buy these at your garden centers and your big box stores as well. We call this a drop seeder, okay? Now, I've seen homeowners that have used these to try to fertilize your lawn, and those are the lawns that you see get quite a bit of striping on them because they incorrectly use these for fertilizing lawns. These are meant for seed in most cases. So I would suggest to use this. Simply fill the hopper full of seed and then open up the holes on the seeder, and you walk over the area and evenly apply the seed. I really encourage you to have a look at our University of Minnesota Extension website. It's extension.umn.edu. On there we have different grass seeding rates for the different species that we use, and you will get some guidance with that. So we don't want to put way too much seed down. Might be, you know, pretty cost prohibitive as well, but ultimately we'd have a lot of competition from all those little seedlings if we don't use the correct seeding rate, okay? So following that seeding, I am going to rake the seed into the soil surface with a light leaf rake. I'm going to take a nice flexible leaf rake here, and I'm going to lightly rake that seed into the soil so we get really good seed to soil contact with that seed there. If essentially you've had a very large extent of damage to your lawn and you're conducting what we would consider a reseeding or a new establishment of a lawn, in that case it might be in your best interest to use a starter fertilizer, which is high in phosphorus, that middle number on a fertilizer bag. Just be sure that you're actually doing a new establishment, because we do have phosphorus fertilizer legislation here in Minnesota that in most cases would restrict the use of it, with some exceptions. If you have small areas of damage to your lawn, I would simply suggest just to use a nitrogen and potassium-based fertilizer. Now, one tool that the University of Minnesota Land Care crew utilizes to repair damage on a lot of these boulevard areas in the spring of the year is this biodegradable fabric called Erosion blanket. The nice thing with the Erosion blanket is it helps to protect the seed, certainly in the soil, from moving off-site with any type of intense rainfall. It also helps hold quite a bit of moisture, which is particularly beneficial for the seed germination process. Whether you're using erosion control blanket or simply seeding right into bare soil, you're going to want to consider irrigating lightly at least 2 to 4 times per day in the absence of rain to maintain moisture for that seedling germination process. We want the seed to never lose moisture, but not be overly saturated. Quite often we see the two extremes, either way too dry or way too wet. I encourage you to water lightly several times per day, and you'll see germination and recovery well within 1 week in most cases. Thanks for watching. You can find more tips for lawn care, horticulture, and all other gardening practices at our website, extension.umn.edu, our Yard and Garden News blog, and you can certainly follow me on Twitter at UrbanTurfMN.